So today I'm going to do a video. We're going to talk about how the ripstick works, and I'm going to tell you 5 things that you didn't know about the ripstick. Okay, so the first thing you might not have known about caster boards is the truck of the caster board operates on the exact same sort of mechanical principles that a normal skateboard or longboard truck works on. Where a normal truck is set up, the angle is set up with on a base plate, or on this ripstick, this base plate is essentially cast into the plastic of the board. On this cast Ronin, you can see it's got this pivot on the front, this right here, it's got the pin, and it rotates on that pivot. That is the same thing as you got right here, this pivot right there, and it just pivots around that pivot. The caster board is able to spin 360 degrees around the pivot, whereas the cast Ronin, it bottoms out on the hanger and, in this case, on the bushings. So the main difference between a normal skateboard and a caster board is that the caster board is kind of what you get when you mount the rear truck on backwards. So on a normal skateboard, the troughs are mounted in opposing directions. And on a caster board, if we pull out a little bit, so you can see, both trucks are mounted in the same direction. So normally on a skateboard, when you lean to the right, you will turn to the right. But on a caster board, because both trucks are mounted the same direction, they both turn the same way, so instead you just kind of strafe to the right, but continue traveling straight. And that's the main difference. So to turn a caster board, you turn the front in the direction you want to turn. So, and then the rear, you lean in the opposite direction. So this is how I turn right, and this is how I turn left. And that's the main mechanical difference between a caster board and a normal longboard or skateboard truck. So the second thing you might not have known about caster boards is that caster boards cannot get speed wobble. So what happens is on a normal skateboard or longboard, the steering is self-correcting. If you lean to the right, it turns to the right, and it pulls itself back underneath you, and that's kind of what this self-correcting cycle propagates and causes speed wobble. However, on a ripstick, because it doesn't turn when you lean, it just kind of strafes, it breaks that cycle. It cannot pull itself underneath you. So if you're going really fast and you lose control of it, and it jerks in one direction, it's just going to go off in that direction, and it's not going to wobble back and forth. So not to say that it makes it a good thing or a bad thing, because stability isn't the same thing as not getting speed wobble, but you often hear the claim that certain things don't get speed wobble, and here's a case where it's kind of actually true, and not really for a reason you'd expect. So the third thing you might not have known about caster boards is how they're able to propel themselves. How does that pumping work? How does that serpentine motion translate to forward motion? So I'm going to show you how that works, and I'm going to start my demonstration with this wheel on a stick, or an axle. So if I push this wheel in the direction that the axle is pointing, right, the wheel just slides, right? If I do it at 90 degrees to the direction that the axle is pointing, then it rolls, right? Nothing really unexpected about any of that. However, if I kind of go at a 45 or some angle in between those two angles, as I push it, the wheel spins as it's sliding. And that's kind of the basis of how the ripstick works. If I wasn't holding it, if I was just applying force in that direction, so I'm forcing it to move along the line. But if I just apply force in that direction with the wheel oriented this way, and I don't force to move on this line, it'll actually just roll forward when I push sideways, right? So I push sideways, it'll roll forward. If I push this way, it rolls forward, right? So that's the basis of how the ripstick works. As I push to the right of the ripstick, the wheels turn and align themselves so they're kind of traveling at a 45 like this. As I push sideways, they travel like that, and that brings it forwards. And push the other way, and it goes forwards again. Forwards, forwards, forwards. No matter which direction I push. If I push left, it goes forwards because the wheels spin and rotate so they're facing at like a 45 or so. Push the other direction. They spin and it pushes and they go that way. And so that's kind of how the way the propulsion works. So you don't actually even need to have the front going one way and the back going another. You can actually just have them both going the same direction at the same time. Here I've got my cast Ronin board, and I've set it up so the rear truck is mounted backwards. So I've set this up to be like a caster board without a split in the middle. And I've attached this string to the axle so I can pull sideways on the board without influencing the lean of the deck. And I'll show you how, if you pull sideways, it'll, because of the caster, so this, like I said, the cast Ronins have just a little bit of caster. And because of that caster, it'll cause the wheels to rotate. And even without having a spinny single wheel going on, this will work. Sideways force will cause this to move forwards. So let's check this out. So as I pull sideways, it causes the board to go forward. So if you see here, if I start with the board leaning to the right, as I pull, it'll actually straighten the board out, and now it's actually leaning to the left. So it's because the caster on this board is so small, the effect is weak, but it's still there. Right? So it's rolling back downhill. Oh, all of my notes. As I pull sideways, it goes forwards. Let go, goes back. I don't have to pull it forward. I can just pull it sideways, and that makes it go forward. And that's how the propulsion on the Ripstik or any caster board works. So the fourth thing you might not have known about caster boards is, why does it only have one wheel per axle instead of two like a normal skateboard? I've just shown that it has the same basic mechanical principles as a normal longboard or skateboard, and I've shown that the caster propulsion works with the same mechanisms on a normal longboard or skateboard. So why does it have two wheels instead of four? And to explore that, I'm actually going to put four wheels on the caster board on the rear, and I'll show you what happens and how that interferes and how it makes it more difficult for it to be a caster board. So let's see how that affects things. Alright, so here's a look at the front wheel, and you can see what happens is when I lean to the left, this angle kind of changes and it rotates. If you visualize this as the plate, the high spot on the plate is up here. So because the wheel's on the caster, it kind of aligns with that high spot. Because if you see, if I rotate it the other way, see how much the whole deck rises? So that just changes where the board has the lowest center of gravity. And so as I lean to the left, the high spot is now over here, so the wheel points in this new direction. Same if I lean to the right. And then if I just push the board sideways, you can see it's able to rotate quite a bit without moving up and down a whole lot. So the back truck still has this mechanic where I lean and the caster causes it to trail along the highest point of the pivot, right? So that still works. But if I try to just move the truck side to side, see what happens this time. If I try to push forwards towards the camera, it drops down this side because it's rotating, and it drops down the left wheel and has to raise the right wheel. And if I go the other way, it'll away from the camera, it drops the right wheel and raises the left. And if I just manually hold it and do a full rotation, see how much it has to raise one of the wheels just to get it to rotate around? So this axle width really interferes with the caster truck's ability to rotate and align itself with side-to-side motion, even though it can still lean and steer just as well. So if you try to ride the Ripstik like this, you can actually still ride it and steer really well, but pumping becomes a lot more difficult because you can no longer rely on pushing side to side to line up your trucks in order to get that direction you want. You'd have to manually rotate and lean the deck to point the wheels in the direction it needs to go in order for it to pump. And that makes it a lot more work. And so yeah, that is why the caster board has 2 wheels instead of 4. So the last thing you might not know about caster boards is if the single wheel and the big caster is allowing you to have the wheel rotate by pushing it side to side, and if that's how the propulsion works, then how do you have any control over which way the board's going? Won't it just go whichever way it wants? So the answer to that is that your weight actually holds the wheel in direction pretty strongly. So when you're standing on it, it can't actually deviate that far from the direction it's pointing based on its lean. Your weight keeps it in line. So it's actually possible to do really hard carves and to force the board to go where you want it to go. If the posture was better, you could probably even do slides on it. So the problem with sliding on a ripstick isn't the fact that if you go to slide, that it'll just go sideways and won't turn. The problem is the posture of riding. If I want to be turning left to do a big slide like this, my front foot is going to have to be leaning back this way, like I normally would on the skateboard, you know, leaning back into the turn. But my front foot has to be leaning forward. So my posture in a slide would be something like this. And I am so upright, I can't do a hard enough turn to lean far enough back to compensate for the forces that are going to be pushing me forward into the turn. So the only way that could ever work is if I had an upright position and I'm just leaning so far back with my back that I'm able to stay upright. But to prove that if you go to try to slide, that the wheels just won't go down the hill and won't go where you want it to go, I'm gonna try to attempt it anyway and see if I can break my rear wheel loose for you. So let's try that. There we go. Alright, so that was a pretty pathetic slide, but the whole point was just to demonstrate a point, and that was that the weight on the deck is enough to keep the wheel pointed in the right direction, even when there's a lot of side force acting on it. If the wheel wasn't kept pointing in the direction it was supposed to, instead of sliding, it would just rotate and roll sideways. And a slide shows that that's not what it's doing. So there we go, there's 5 points, 5 things you didn't know about caster boards. So hopefully now you know a whole lot more. And with that, Longboard Technology, over and out. Bonus points. This is the bonus round. So people might be wondering, how come you can't push a ripstick like you can with a normal skateboard? You can't push it like that, it doesn't stay up. Why is that? And the reason is actually really, really simple. The problem is the roll axis of the deck is so high, and there's no bearing and there's no bushings to assist you keeping the thing upright. So because the roll axis is so high, you have to have influence over a wider portion of the deck than the width of your foot. So you just don't have the leverage with the width of your foot to hold the ripstick upright and push from it. So that's why you have to balance on it side to side. So if your feet are perpendicular with it, you've got lots of leverage and you can hold it upright. So if I just skew my foot a little bit so I have a wider stance, and it'll give me more leverage and it'll let me actually be able to do that and push. And it's a little skewampus, but you can actually do it. It's just a matter of leverage over the deck.